I came home from a 3-week assignment at 2 in the morning, dead on my feet, and my key would not turn in my own front door. I thought it was stuck. I jiggled it the way you do, and then I heard the chain slide and the door opened 4 inches, and my best friend of 20 years looked at me through the gap and said, in a voice I had never heard her use, "You need to leave. This is my house now. I've already called." Hi, I'm Ethan Cole, and this is Ethan After Dark, where I tell stories of betrayal, family secrets, revenge, and sweet justice. Now back to the story. Police. I stood on my own porch under my own light, holding a key that no longer fit a lock I had paid for, and I want to tell you what I felt. It was not rage, not yet. I am a traveling ICU nurse. I have spent 15 years walking into rooms where everything is coming apart, where alarms are screaming and a person is dying and everyone else is panicking, and the single most important thing I have learned, the thing that has saved more lives than any drug, is this: the calmest person in the room controls it. Panic is the enemy. So when my friend told me my own house was hers, something in me went very quiet and very clinical, the way it does at a bedside when a heart stops. I did not scream. I stepped back off the porch, I sat in my car, and I started methodically to assess. Because Jenna had made one enormous miscalculation. She had looked at me, the friend who is always away, the soft touch, the one who says yes, and she had decided I would be easy to steamroll. She did not understand that being calm is not the same as being weak, and that a nurse who keeps her head at a code is exactly the wrong person to try to panic out of her own home. Let me back up, because you have to understand how you let someone into your life far enough to do this. Jenna and I had been best friends since we were 19. 20 years. She was the wild one, the fun one, the friend who pulled quiet, responsible me out of my shell, and I loved her the way you love the people who knew you before you were finished becoming yourself. Our lives went different directions, mine into nursing, into the strange nomadic career of travel contracts where you go where the hospitals are short-staffed and stay for 13 weeks and move on. I did well at it. I saved carefully. And 4 years ago, I did the thing I was proudest of in my whole life. I bought a house. A small one, nothing fancy but mine, with my name on the deed and a mortgage I paid with night shifts and holidays away from everyone I loved. It was the first place that had ever been truly my own. Jenna's life went the other way. A marriage that went bad, a job that ended, a series of what she called rough patches that started to look, if you stood back far enough, less like patches and more like the whole fabric. I helped where I could, because that is what you do for the people who knew you at 19. And when her marriage finally collapsed and she had nowhere to go, I did not hesitate. I had a spare room. I was hardly ever even home. Of course, I told her, "Stay with me. Get back on your feet. Take a few weeks, take a couple of months, whatever you need. No rent," I said, "do not even think about it, we are family. Just water the plants while I'm on assignment." I want you to hear how that sounded. Sounded like love. It was love. It was also, though I could not see it then, the exact hole a certain kind of person walks through. The thing about my job is that I am gone in long stretches. I would leave for a 13-week contract 2 states away and come home for a week and leave again. And a house you are barely in is a house you are barely watching. The first month, Jenna was grateful and lovely and everything was fine. The second month, when I came home, some of my things had been moved and hers had spread, and she was a little short with me in my own kitchen, and I told myself she was just stressed. By the 4th month, she had stopped mentioning looking for her own place at all. By the 6th, when I came home between contracts, it had started to feel, in a way I could not quite name, like I was the guest. There was one moment I should have seen for what it was. I came home from a contract to find she had moved my things out of the primary bedroom closet, my own bedroom, to make room for her clothes, and when I said something gently, she looked at me with a flash of something cold and said, "Well, you're never even here. You're never even here." At the time I heard it as stress, as a woman embarrassed to be dependent lashing out. I know now it was a thesis statement. In her mind, my absence had already begun to erase my ownership. The house belonged, she had decided, to whoever actually slept in it, and that was increasingly her while I was off keeping strangers alive in other states. I should have understood that day that we were no longer 2 friends sharing a space. We were an owner and a person quietly deciding she had a better claim. I did the thing I am not proud of, the thing that let it all happen. I let it slide. I was tired. I was away. I did not want a confrontation on my 1 week home before I shipped out again. I told myself she would land on her feet eventually, that a true friend gives grace, that it was only a spare room. Conflict avoidance is its own kind of cowardice, and mine cost me. And here is the thing I have had to make peace with. My kindness was real, and it was not the problem. Her willingness to weaponize it was the problem. You should be able to give a friend a soft place to land without a contract. That we cannot always is a fact about certain people, not a flaw in generosity itself. But while I was being gracious and absent, Jenna was doing something I did not discover until much later. She was doing research. Here is what I learned afterward, from her own browser history, which came out later. Somewhere around the 5th month, Jenna started searching things like how long before a guest becomes a tenant, and squatters' rights in my state, and can a homeowner remove someone without an eviction. She had discovered a real and genuinely frightening quirk of the law, which is that in many places, once a person has lived somewhere long enough, you cannot simply throw them out, even if they never paid a cent, even if there was never a lease. They may have become, in the eyes of the law, a tenant at will, and to remove a tenant you have to go through a formal eviction, which takes months. And somewhere in that research, my best friend of 20 years stopped seeing my spare room as my kindness and started seeing it as her opportunity. She began, deliberately, to build a case that she was a tenant. She started leaving small amounts of cash on the counter that she would later claim were rent, which I never took and never asked for. She had mail sent to the house, official mail to establish residency. She was constructing, brick by brick, the story that she lived there as a tenant with rights so that when the moment came, she could force me into a months-long eviction of a person from my own home, and in the meantime simply refuse to leave. She was going to use my own generosity as the foundation of a claim against my own house. And then, while I was 3 weeks into a contract 400 miles away, she changed the locks. So there I was, 2 in the morning, sitting in my car outside my own house, locked out with my best friend inside claiming it was hers and the police supposedly on their way. And here is where being who I am mattered. Because a lot of people in that moment would have done exactly what Jenna was hoping for. They would have pounded on the door. They would have screamed, tried to force a window, made a scene. And when the police arrived, they would have found a hysterical person trying to break into a house where a calm woman inside said she lived and felt threatened. That is the trap. That is the whole play. Jenna needed me to panic so that I would look like the aggressor and she would look like the frightened resident. She had even called the police herself to set the scene. I did not give it to her. I have talked down families watching a loved one crash. I know how to keep my voice level when everything in me is screaming. So when the police did arrive, they did not find a woman breaking into a house. They found me sitting calmly in my car, and when the officer approached, I rolled down my window and I said, evenly, "Thank you for coming. I own this house. The woman inside is a guest who has overstayed and has changed the locks without my permission. I have the deed, the mortgage, and the utility bills, all in my name only, and I have not been able to enter my own home. How would you like me to show you?" Calm is a kind of authority. The officer's whole posture changed. Now, the law here is genuinely tricky, and I want to be honest about it because this is the part that traps so many people. The police that night could not simply drag Jenna out. Because she was claiming to be a resident, and because these disputes can be civil tenant matters rather than criminal trespass, the officers told me what officers usually have to say. That this looked like a landlord-tenant issue, that they could not remove her on the spot, and that I might have to go through the courts. Jenna, listening from behind her chained door, thought she had one. I could hear it in her voice. She thought the law's slowness was her shield. But here is what she did not understand, because she had done just enough research to be dangerous and not enough to be right. A tenancy is not something you can simply declare. To be a tenant, there has to have been a tenancy, an agreement, rent, the actual substance of a landlord and a renter. And I could prove in writing that none of that had ever existed. What existed instead was 2 decades of texts. and I had kept all of them not out of strategy, but because I am a person who keeps things. The morning after, I did not go back and pound on the door. I went to a lawyer and I brought my phone. And we sat together and we read, in order, 20 years but especially the last 6 months of messages between me and Jenna. And they told the whole story better than any testimony ever could. Thank you so much for letting me crash. You are literally saving my life. I promise I'll be out of your hair as soon as I find a place. You're the best. I don't know what I'd do without you letting me stay. I'll water the plants while you're on your contract. Every single message was the language of a grateful guest, not a tenant. Not one of them mentioned rent or a lease or any of the substance of a tenancy. She had, in her own words, over and over across months, documented that she was staying as a guest, out of my charity temporarily. She had built my case for me while thanking me for the room she was planning to steal. My lawyer read them, set down the phone, and said the sentence I will not forget. She spent 6 months acting like a tenant, but she spent 6 months writing like a guest. Guests don't get to keep the house, dear. And she put it all in writing. There was one more thing, and it was the detail that turned the whole case from defense into daylight. When the matter moved forward and there was discovery, Jenna's own device told on her. The searches were all there, time-stamped, going back to the 5th month she lived with me. How long until a house guest becomes a tenant? Squatters' rights in my state. How to stay in a house without a lease. Can an owner change the locks back on a tenant? She had not drifted into this. She had studied it. She had sat in the bedroom I gave her, in the house I paid for with holidays away from everyone I loved, and researched like homework exactly how to take it from me. I think that was the moment the last of my grief hardened into something quieter and clearer. You can forgive a friend who is desperate and makes a bad choice in a panic. It is much harder to forgive a friend who planned it, calmly, over months, while thanking you in text messages for your kindness. The premeditation was almost worse than the theft. I read those searches sitting in my lawyer's office and I did not cry, which surprised me. I had done my crying in the car at 2 in the morning on the porch. By the time I saw the evidence of how deliberate it had been, I was already somewhere past tears, in the calm clinical place where I do my best work, the place where you stop hoping the numbers will change and you simply read what is true and act on it. So we did it the right way, the calm way, the way that wins. Not a screaming self-help lockout, which would have been illegal and would have handed her exactly the victim story she wanted. Instead, my lawyer filed the correct action to remove a guest who was not a tenant, and we brought the whole documented truth to it. The deed in my name alone, the mortgage I had paid with night shifts, every utility bill, for years of me living there as sole owner, and the 6 months of texts in which Jenna repeatedly, gratefully described herself as a temporary guest. Against that, she had a handful of cash she claimed was rent that I had never accepted and that appeared nowhere in my accounts, and a browser history, once it came out, full of searches about how to exploit squatters' rights. Her own research became the proof of her intent. It did not take months, the way she had gambled it would, because the moment there is clear documentary proof that no tenancy ever existed, these things move fast. The court saw exactly what had happened. A homeowner, a guest, and a guest who had tried to manufacture rights she never had. Jenna was ordered out. Here is the part that still amazes me. On the day it was enforced, the same police force that Jenna had called on me, the ones she had tried to weaponize into removing me from my own home, were the ones who stood in my driveway and made sure she left. She carried her own bags out to her own car under the flat, neutral gaze of an officer, past me, and she could not look at me. 20 years of friendship ended with her putting a box in a trunk while a policeman watched, and me standing in the doorway of the house she had tried to take. Holding the deed she thought being away made me too soft to defend. I changed the locks back that afternoon. My locks, my key, turned. I want to say something to anyone who is where I was, because I have since learned how common this is, and how many people lose homes and years and fortunes to it. The instinct, when a guest turns predatory, is to panic and to do something drastic, to shut off the power, to throw their things on the lawn, to force your way in and change the locks yourself in a rage. Do not. That is exactly the trap, because most of those self-help moves are illegal, and they convert you, the wronged owner, into the lawbreaker, and they hand the person exactly the victim story they need. The boring truth is that you win these fights the way I win a code in the ICU. You stay calm, you refuse to do the dramatic thing, you gather what is real and documented, and you let the correct process do the work. It feels unbearably slow while you are living in your car and a stranger is sleeping in your bed. But calm and documented beats loud and lawless every single time, and I have the deed back to prove it. The empty house was very quiet that first night. I sat on my own floor in my own living room and I did not feel triumphant. I felt like someone who had survived something. I grieved that friendship, and I want to be honest that the grief was real and it was strange, because the person I would once have called to cry about losing a friend was the friend I had lost. 20 years. She knew me at 19. And she looked at all of that history, all of that love, all of those late-night texts, and she saw a resource to be extracted, an absent woman soft enough to steamroll. That is the part that took the longest to heal. Not the house was only ever a building. The wound was learning that someone I trusted completely had been quietly measuring my kindness for the exact place to insert the knife. People ask me whether I feel bad about how it ended, whether I was too harsh. And I think about the ICU, where I have learned that the kindest thing you can do in a crisis is refuse to panic, assess what is real, and act on the truth calmly and without cruelty. I was never cruel to Jenna. I never screamed, never lied, never did a single thing outside the law. I simply declined to be stampeded off my own property, and I let the truth, documented in her own grateful words, do the work. That is not harshness. That is what steadiness looks like when someone mistakes your calm for a weakness they can rob. I still leave for assignments. Someone still waters the plants. But the spare room stays empty now, or it goes to people who understand what a gift is, and I have learned the lesson that cost me a friend and almost cost me my home. Generosity is beautiful, and generosity needs a paper trail. Say yes with your whole heart and keep the receipts, because the sad truth I learned at 2 in the morning on my own locked porch is that the people most likely to exploit your kindness are the ones who know exactly how kind you are. Charm is loud, and panic is contagious, and a deed does not blink. Stay calm. Keep everything. The house was always mine, and in the end, so was the truth. And that's the end of this one. If it kept you up, do me one favor, hit subscribe. I tell a new story every single night, and I'd love to have you back. Good night.